Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jenny Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yes, happy Valentine's Day.
And it is actually Valentine's Day as we are recording this. We were actually scheduled to record this yesterday, so Tuesday of this week, but we had to make a last minute change. And so we're recording very early on Valentine's morning.
Yes. So yeah, usually we do not record this early. So I don't want to say maybe we're more awake than usual. So we'll see how.
Well, yeah, I did make sure I have some like actual hot water to keep my voice going for today. In my favorite mug, if you've been watching on YouTube, oh, there we go. If I back up, you can see it. If you've been watching on YouTube, you've seen me use this mug a few times. It's got all kinds of headstone artwork on it. My mom
really
sent it to me for Christmas. It's my favorite mug, and I just figure it's appropriate for our show. So I keep using it for that.
Until we get our own, right?
Until we have our own merch, which is in the works, folks. Like, we do plan to have some mugs and shirts and things available for you guys soon. We just have to figure all of that out. Yes. And that's just another thing that we'd have to put together. But yes, so today we're recording with lots of extra love. I noticed you're wearing red today. I'm wearing red.
Yeah.
I wore my pink pearls even. So it used to be a double strand of pink because they're vintage. Like, I found them in an antique shop. So they're vintage pink pearl beads. And it was a double strand until a week or two ago. And I went to put them on, and like the second strand just went, and I had little pink beads all over my bedroom floor.
Oh, are you planning on getting it restranded or just leave it?
No, I think I want to get it redone. So I was able to gather, I think, all of the beads. I had to, like, we have wood floors, so I was chasing them everywhere. And even though there's a rug in there, it was still like under the bed and under the dresser and out into the hallway. Like, they were pink beads everywhere. I'd like to get it fixed because I think it's really pretty when it's the double strand, but also it's a little bit lighter when there's only one strand, I've noticed. So
make a bracelet.
That's true. And maybe actual matching earrings. Like, I'm wearing pink earrings too, but they're, they didn't come with the necklace. So I could make like
that would be pretty.
Earrings to match my necklace. That would be really pretty because there's such a pretty shade of pink. I've never seen another one quite like this. And so I really like it, but I was really sad when it like burst and I had a shower of beads. It really was a shower of beads. So anyway, with that said, love is in the air since it is Valentine's Day. And this year we thought we would share the story of a woman who led, shall we say, an unconventional or alternative life as a madam in the Wild West. And despite her unconventional path, found love and respect among many in her community, and her final resting place has not been forgotten. Today, we travel to southern Colorado and the mountain town of Durango, one of my favorites. If we follow a short winding road just east of town, we come to Greenmount Cemetery, established in the early 1900s and situated so that it overlooks Durango below.
And as you can see behind me, that is the front gate of the entrance into the cemetery. Not far from the main entrance, you will come to block 27. In one of the patches protected by large, lovely shade trees is a small red and gray granite marker simply inscribed Frankie Ferguson, 1861 to 1937. There's nothing to indicate this woman's story, but it was said of her that she was one of the sweetest women you ever met in your life. She would do anything for anybody to help them out. She spent most of her adult life in Durango, and up until about 1920, she was known around town as Madam Bessie Rivers. Her life began simply enough when she was born to Iowa farmers, Horace and Hannah Stewart, most likely between 1861 and 1863. Most census records list her date of birth as 1862, but there are some that say 1865 and one that lists 1877. Her parents named her Frances, but it seems she was called Frankie. There was only one other child in the family, another daughter named Cora, who was about 2 years older than Frankie.
And we're going to talk about a little bit later how honest Bessie really was. But it seems like age was not something that she felt she needed to be honest about regularly, which I think is why there's a discrepancy in records, especially that 1877 one, because she would have been on that particular census record, and I can't remember what year it was, but she would have been closer to 50 by the time she did that particular survey. So my guess is she didn't look that old and decided she wasn't going to be that old on official records.
Well, it's okay for a woman to lie about her age.
Right? I figure of all the other things, that's, she can get away with that one. Judging by the few records available, Cora and Frankie had a normal farm girl childhood. They attended school, and it wasn't long before they were grown enough to be married and begin families of their own. Frankie married Charles Ferguson, a man who was nearly 10 years her senior in 1877. Like her father, Charles was a farmer, and Frankie was a homemaker who soon gave birth to a son they named Arthur. However, their domestic bliss lasted only a short time. It seems that Frankie and Cora were very close, and sometime prior to 1885, Cora moved with her husband to Silverton, Colorado. And I think this move weighed heavily on Frankie, who was not content to stay behind in Iowa caring for a young child and husband. Though we don't know exactly when, Frankie left Charles and Arthur in Iowa sometime prior to 1888 to follow her sister to the land of silver and gold. Records seem to indicate that Charles was granted a divorce from Frankie, most likely on the grounds of abandonment, and by February 1888, he was married to a new wife named Anna.
When Frankie arrived in Colorado, she chose to settle in Durango, which is just shy of 50 miles south of Silverton, along the Animas River where Cora lived. Silverton, we'd like to note, sits at an elevation of 9,318 feet. And there is snow on the ground for much of the year. Durango's elevation tops at 6,512 feet, making it a more seasonable place to live. Frankie was done living the life of a respectable woman and initially took a job as a dance hall girl before venturing into the world of prostitution around the year 1890. Kathy Alexander writes in her article, Painted Ladies of the Old West, there were two types of, quote, bad girls in the West. The worst type, according to the proper women, were the many painted ladies who made their living by offering paid sex in the numerous brothels and parlor houses and cribs on the western towns. The second type of bad girl was the saloon and dance hall women who, contrary to some popular thinking, were generally not prostitutes. This tended to occur only in the very shabbiest class of saloons. Though the respectable ladies considered the saloon girls fallen, most of these women wouldn't be caught dead associating with the actual prostitutes. A saloon or dance hall girl's job was to brighten the evenings of the many lonely men in the western towns. In the Old West, men usually outnumbered women by at least 3-1, sometimes more, as was the case in California in 1850, where 90% of the population was male. Starved for female companionship, the saloon girl would sing for the men, dance with them, and talk to them, and also inducing them to remain in the bar, buying drinks and patronizing the games.
Yeah, that was their main job, was to get them to buy the alcohol or to buy into the poker games or whatever games were going on in the room. And that's how the saloon girls actually earned their money. They were usually paid a commission on every drink that they sold. And they would drink along with the men, but a lot of times their drinks were either actually like tea or something else, right, or really watered down liquor, but they were getting the men drunk enough to keep spending all their money in the saloons. But it did not necessarily require them to sleep with the men, although that did happen. It was not uncommon for dance hall girls and prostitutes to use a name or names other than their own. There are many cases where some girls changed their names each time they moved to a new town. We don't know exactly when Frankie started using the name Bessie Rivers, but she is mentioned by this name in official records for the first time in 1896, when she was witness to the self-inflicted gunshot death of a man who was called to testify at the coroner's inquest. She worked her way to the top in a fairly short amount of time, and by 1898 was running her own brothel. Jan McKell Collins, who we've had on the show before, relates the story of John Arrington, who was a little boy about 9 when he visited her brothel that year in her book, Good Time Girls of Colorado. John had been working with a group of men called freighters, men whose job was to move everything from food to machinery, household goods, and needed equipment for the rancher, miner, farmer, households, and storekeepers across the West and up over the treacherous mountain paths from mining community to mining community. The men John was with decided to spend their night in Durango, visiting the ladies of Bessie Rivers' sporting house. When Bessie realized that he was just a child, she gave him some money to go get himself ice cream and candy, and then arranged to have him sleep at a nearby livery stable, as a brothel was no place for a young boy, Bessie told him. As an adult, John looked back on that memory fondly and said that Bessie Rivers was one of the most wonderful women I ever met.
The 1900 federal census lists Bessie as the owner of a house on 10th Street in Durango, and her occupation is that of a landlady sports. I love that euphemism.
Right?
She had 4 girls working for her at the time. They were listed as boarders on the census. Curiously, there is also an older gentleman, Thomas Hay, also listed as a boarder. Perhaps he helped as security or a maintenance man, or even he was a customer who happened to be there the day the census was taken. Bessie was one of those madams who took very good care of her girls and ran an honest business. There were many brothels throughout the West with a reputation for taking more than they gave, meaning they often fleeced their customers. Jan McKell Collins tells us in her book, Brothels, Boarders, and Bad Girls. Some girls learn to bite diamond lapel pins, buttons, and other small gems from their customers' jackets and shirts. Some brothels became known as panel houses, wherein a woman would lead her victim into the room. Suddenly, a man would pop out of a hidden panel, pass himself off as an enraged husband, and extort money from the surprised stranger before escorting him unceremoniously from the premises. Or that same panel might be used to sneak into the room and steal the victim's money while he slept or was otherwise engaged. Sometimes there was merely a sliding panel in the back of the closet. Panel workers would then remove the man's wallet and take just enough money from it to not be noticed before putting it back. Creepers accomplished the same thing by sliding quietly across the floor to the man's clothes while the girl kept him busy. He says sort of creeped in. Hook artists used a rod and a hook to lift the clothes into reach.
Quite the elaborate scams they had going on. So not only were these guys paying for the services of the ladies, if they were lucky enough to get them in some cases, because it sounds like there were plenty of cases where they didn't actually get what they probably paid for ahead of time, but then they were losing their money and valuables to whatever other accomplices were on site. But these were not practices Bessie Rivers and her girls participated in. In fact, her customers even trusted her to keep their valuables secure in her personal safe while they conducted their business. She also diligently paid her weekly, monthly, and annual fines and liquor license fees to the city. These were fines imposed on many houses of ill repute throughout the West that allowed them to run their business and provided a source of much needed revenue to the cities where they resided. It also, I didn't say it in here, but it also helped sometimes with providing a measure of security from the police when they needed it, especially the higher class, shall we say, parlor houses and things. Aside from the fact that many of the gentlemen who ran the cities were often visitors of these parlor houses, brothels, dens of iniquity, wink, wink, in some cases, the revenue generated from these fines is what paid for public schools, cleaning the streets, and other necessities.
By 1906, Bessie was running the Horseshoe Club located at 969 Main Avenue. And this is the picture that is behind me now. And Jenny just informed me this may be the only known picture of the Horseshoe Club and of Bessie.
If you move to your either left or right, we can see Bessie behind you. There she is. She's kind of down. Yeah, she's very low behind the bar there, but you can see like I'm assuming they were like little gold cherubs on the side of the bar, and there's urns, the very Victorian looking decorations. There's lamps hanging down in the great big giant mirror. It's not a very clear picture of her, but from what you can see, she looked like she was very pretty.
She does. And then it was that elaborate Victorian, I don't know what it's ostentatiousness.
Yes. Oh, that's a great word for when it comes to the Victorian architecture and decor.
Okay, let's see. By 1906, Bessie was running the Horseshoe Club, located at 969 Main Avenue. The front half of the club was an upscale restaurant where meals with 5-course meals were served on fine china by candlelight. One side of the room was occupied by a long, elegant, ornate Victorian bar, which is probably what we were looking at in the picture. There was also a theater in the basement, and Bessie entertained her most esteemed clients in her apartment located above the club.
Bessie was said to be beautiful, a bit tall for the standards of the day, around 5 feet 9 inches or so, but she dressed in the most beautiful dresses and was not afraid to wear them about town, even during the day when she was often looked down upon by the more virtuous, and I'm saying that in quotation marks, of Durango's citizens. She and her girls often dressed in their finest gowns and hats and paraded up and down Main Street in a carriage to advertise their business. Marguerite Cantrell, who grew up in Durango, remembers watching the ladies as a child and thinking how beautiful they were, not realizing why some people found what they were doing distasteful until she was much older. Of course, there was more to Bessie than just being a successful madam. She was also an accomplished amateur photographer, and she wrote lots of letters to friends and family back in Iowa, including her son Arthur. Interestingly, Bessie never admitted to having any children after she left Iowa, but we do know Arthur visited her once briefly as a young man before he moved to Oregon.
By 1908, a new district attorney was elected to office who was determined to clean up Durango's red light district and tighten the reins of the police, whom he felt were too soft on the girls. Bessie was forced to give up her business at the Horseshoe Club, but she simply relocated a few blocks away, applied for new business licenses, and was eventually granted them by members of the city council. She was generous, as always, with the money she made, making sure to support many local charities in town, keeping her in good favor with many of Durango's top citizens. However, by 1920, age and prohibition caught up with Bessie. She gave up the brothel business and instead began running a legitimate boarding house out of the building that was once the elegant Horseshoe Club. This is when she seems to have stopped using the name Bessie Rivers and once more became Frankie Ferguson. She also helped to care for her sister Cora, who at the time was suffering from poor health. She found pleasure in buying books for her to read, as she had become bedridden at the point. Cora died before the end of the year and was buried in Greenmount Cemetery.
In 1925, Frankie purchased a new home where she continued to make her living by taking boarders, the profession she would have for the remainder of her life. She passed away quietly in 1937 at the approximate age of 76 and was laid to rest next to her sister at Greenmount. She was remembered by locals years after her death as a very high type of person, a perfect lady, really good-hearted. They said if a man needed a meal, she bought it for him.
And that seems to be often the stories with the madams of the West. And, a lot of people don't realize they actually did give a lot to the community as far as money for schools, sometimes churches, even though sometimes the parishioners may have looked the other way, or the women parishioners may have looked the other way. And they don't get as much credit for what they did, I don't think.
I think they're getting more credit now because I think we realize now just how much these ladies would do for their communities in most cases. Yes, there were the ones that obviously did the fleecing and ran, you know, crime rings and stuff, but a lot more of them were actually very good. I mean, a lot of them came from very normal upbringings and ended up in this profession either because it was the only thing they could find to do that would actually pay them money so that they could make a living, or because they didn't want to follow tradition and, you know, do other things. You know, there were some of them that very much enjoyed this type of lifestyle, and that was okay too. But they so often were the ones who made sure the children in the towns had things that they needed, like the schools, but also other activities. Like they would pay for baseball leagues and other clubs that the kids would participate in, and they would make sure that, you know, if there was a poor family in town that was really in need, they'd find ways to help those families. And I know we've mentioned it in other episodes, oftentimes the brothels would be opened up to be used as hospitals when there was
Right.
sort of, you know, any kind of epidemic going through town, because a lot of these towns, especially in the West, didn't have a hospital of any kind. They might be lucky and have a doctor who might be able to make house calls, but they didn't have a place where they could quarantine, you know, people of their community while they were really sick. So the brothels would be opened up, and these girls would become the nurses and care for these men and women and children in the community. And, you know, they did all that. And then if there was a disaster, like a fire, which happened a lot, or a flood,
Yeah.
a lot of times it was their money that helped to rebuild the communities. So they
Yeah.
were,
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, they were very, very good to their communities in most cases.
Yeah, and I'm glad that their contributions are coming to light. I mean, we have authors like Jan McKell Collins, who's written several books about these ladies. In fact, she has several on for different states. I know we talked about a couple that were focused in Colorado and the Rocky Mountains. And then I know she has several others because she's lived in several states recently. And so it's like each state she lives in, she writes a book
Yeah.
about.
And well, and the books are the, you know, generally those particular books are the good time girls of
Right,
whatever state
exactly.
or area, or of the Rocky Mountains, because that was the other one.
Mhm.
And my other shout out to Jan is today's topic. Bessie actually came from her book Good Time Girls of Colorado, because I was going back through, I was actually looking up something else and read about Bessie and had kind of forgotten about her, because I'm pretty sure when I read the book the first time, you know, it was there, and then Bessie kind of disappeared because I think we were focused on some other things. And I was like, you know, we haven't really focused on anything in Southern Colorado, I don't think, in any of our other episodes. Yeah, I
Not
don't think
that I
we've
can
done anything. And of course, you and I have both been to Durango.
cite.
It's a
For me, many years ago.
Yeah, I was fortunate we lived for several years, for 3 or 4 years, in Farmington, New Mexico, which is about 30-40 minutes away from the border of Durango and Colorado. And so when I was a kid, we actually went often to Durango. My parents had friends there. And so we spent a lot of time in Durango when I was little. And that's when I fell in love with Victorian culture and ideas, and the Stratter Hotel, which is there, which is one of their historic hotels that one day I will get to stay at that hotel.
Yeah, we sort of put that on a bucket list.
We do have it on our bucket list for
Yes.
both of us.
So if anybody's listening from the Strater Hotel,
I was
ride the
supposed to stay
train.
there in 2021. My mom and we had taken a
Yeah.
trip there. It had been many years since I had been to Durango at that point, but we decided we were actually on our way to New Mexico, but we decided to make a pit stop overnight in Durango. And I had made reservations at the hotel for the following year and didn't realize it till we went to check in, and they unfortunately didn't have any open rooms. So we had to get a room at another hotel in town. So I was all excited because I'd been wanting to stay in that hotel since I was 9 years old. It will happen one of these days. I will finally get to stay there. But and I know it's kind of a silly thing, but it's a beautiful historic hotel. The rooms are done up beautifully in that Victorian style that is just kind of exciting to me. But so yeah, I was giving Jan a shout out because it was her book that led me to Bessie again. And then fortunately, most of the details that I have about her life came from her book. And then I also went back and dug through the census records and stuff that I'm pretty sure are the exact same ones that Jan used when she was writing her book. I did notice though, so the Horseshoe Club, at the time that Jan published the book, she has some photos on her own Facebook page of the building where the Horseshoe Club was located. And at that time, and I don't know what year this book came out, but at that time, the downstairs portion of the Horseshoes Club looked like it was a Subway restaurant. Now it is currently a salon, and I had it pulled up so I could tell you. It's the Hair Fusion Spa and Salon, Durango's premier spa and salon. So if you need to get your hair done or any spa services, they do it now out of there, which I think is kind of fun considering that its history started out, as this very opulent restaurant. And on the backside, and I didn't get into it in our script, but on the backside was I think it was the Horseshoe Cafe, which was a little less opulent, and there was a dance hall behind it, and the dance hall was managed by a gentleman, I don't remember his name, but he and Bessie were apparently very good friends and kind of looked out for each other, and he ran the dance hall and she ran the restaurant or whatever was going on in the theater downstairs. And then I do believe that upstairs in that building, I think that's condos still, so people still live upstairs, as I think has always been the case since that building was built.
It was a way to keep the building maintained too by having other businesses in there. Even though we would like to be able to have access to all these wonderful old buildings, it's also a way to maintain them and keep them going.
So if you happen to be in Durango, you can actually still see that particular building because it's right there on Main Street. And, it's that brick 2-story Victorian fronted building. It has 2 big windows, one on each side of where the doors are located, which it did back in 1906. There was another picture when I was first doing the research for this that I found online, but then of course, when I went back and tried to find more pictures, I couldn't find it again, but of a group of men. And I think the picture was from 1906 or 1907. There was a group of men standing in front of the club, all lined up in front of the windows. Bessie was not in that picture, but they were there. Like I said, this is the picture that's behind, if you're watching us on YouTube, the picture that's behind Dianne now is the only known picture of Bessie. And I actually pulled this picture off of Jan's Facebook page because I wanted us to be able to see this lady that we just talked about. And she actually acquired the picture from Patricia Quink and Andy Chitwood. But yeah, it's kind of fun to be able to see the interior of her club. This was her most prestigious of her houses, but she had several other, some of the buildings or houses no longer exist, or like the addresses that were listed for them at the time. I looked on like Google Maps and they're definitely not there anymore because one of them popped up in the middle of the street and there's nothing there. Like, like there's houses, it's a neighborhood, but the address itself, the numbers don't exist anymore at that point. So it got redone. Durango did have a large fire that went through it in the early 1890s, which is part of the reason we don't know as much about Bessie's early life in Durango. We're assuming she was there and probably working in a brothel at that point, but records and information may have been destroyed because of that fire, unfortunately. So it's not till later that we find out more about her. We did have a couple other pictures. There is one of her grave site that we were able to get off of Find a Grave, and that picture was taken by, her name was, hang on, I kept it, Susan Meyer. And she posted this picture up in January of 2022. So here is her actual grave site. Yeah, just one second. So this is what her, I tried to describe it as best I could in the description at the beginning, but it does say Frankie Ferguson on it, 1861 to 1937. And it's not quite, it's kind of hard to tell by the angle of this picture. It's not quite flush with the ground. It does stick up just a little bit from the ground, but it's not, it's nothing fancy. So if you were walking through the cemetery and walked past the stone, and unless you knew that Frankie Ferguson was also known as Bessie Rivers, you would walk right by it and not think anything of this particular woman. Like, or you may not even realize that she was a woman, because I did notice in the census records when I was looking at sometime, she was listed as Frank, or was listed as Mel, even though we know she went by Frankie. And then the picture that's currently behind Dianne, which was the one that was right behind me earlier, is one that I took when I was there in Durango. And I think the section that's right behind Dianne, as you go further back towards the trees, I'm pretty sure that's the section where this grave is located. I didn't know about Bessie when I was there, so I didn't go looking for her grave. So unfortunately, I don't have my own photo to share of her grave. But as Diane and I were talking before we started recording, Greenmount is a very pretty,
That's very pretty,
well-tended cemetery, and lots of interesting graves and grave markers and sections to visit. There's an elks section close to the front with a giant elk statue. The Knights of Pythias also have their own section, and they actually have a really large, I've shared it in some of our other posts for other things, but a really large metal sculpture of their chain links, and it's painted and everything, and it marks their section, which I've never really seen anywhere else. Like usually you see the smaller ones that are for the individual graves, but this one is 10 feet high.
Oh, wow.
It's a big one. They have a wonderful veterans memorial right at the front when you get into the front entrance. And then just some really gorgeous paths and trees, as you can see. Now, we were there in October, so it was fall. It was actually starting to snow that day, so that's why the sky is a little like gray and cloudy, and there were some snowflakes. Yeah.
It looks like summer.
Yeah, it was October. It was after our Beyond the Grave event, after our first one.
No.
So, but again, they're at 6,000 feet. So snow in early October is not a surprise in Durango.
No, definitely not. But it looks like summer because the grass is so green and everything.
I know. It was, like I said, I was super impressed when we got there with how well tended it is. And, we saw several herds of deer and some other wildlife through there. So they're obviously enjoying the well-tended grounds. And so kudos to the groundskeepers there, because they do a wonderful job.
Yeah, and the community, yeah, and definitely the community who makes sure that, of course, whoever's taking care of it, but that it's also it just looks well tended and well loved by the community. So that says a lot.
And that's what we're all about today. We're all about the love today.
We thank you for taking time to join us for this ordinary, extraordinary story. To learn more about the story we shared, please visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you will find the resources we use to research this episode. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel, The Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery Podcast.
And please don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X at OrdExtraCem. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our website, or YouTube. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and history to discover us and our ordinary, extraordinary stories.
Until we meet again.